This is the third of 4 talks we've been having as we've been celebrating the gray whales traveling through this incredible migration they make. They travel 12,000 miles round trip every year from Baja to the Arctic and back. And they're passing along our shores. Who's seen a whale blow lately? A lot of you. Yeah, they're blowing, they're going, they're right here, coming through right now, heading back from Baja. They're hungry. They haven't eaten in maybe 4 months. Some of them have lost almost half their body weight, and they're trying to get up north to the Arctic. So what we're doing here at Noyo Center, we do all kinds of marine science work, education work, and programs like these. And in order to support our programs, we're doing a migration challenge and inviting people to contribute $1 for every mile to move this symbolic mom-calf pair all the way down from Baja back to the Arctic. Tonight, before you all showed up, we were $2,365 shy. So we're really close. And I feel like if everybody just buys some tamales and drinks some beer and wine and leaves a little in the donation bucket or makes a donation online, we could get ourselves to $10,000, maybe even $11,000 tonight, which would be super cool. Because next Thursday, we're having our last gathering, and that one is called Meet the Locals and the locals who study them. And we've got a few of those local whale experts here tonight. It's going to be our final big celebratory time together. We've got Sarah Grimes and Jeff Jacobson are back there. And I'm sure, well, there's Peter Pyle. Maybe I can talk him into joining us. Nope. Maybe. So we've got a lot of people in this community who know a ton about gray whales and have been studying them here. So our last talk for this cycle will be celebrating whales locally with that. And so it's going to be a party and a time to interact and hang out and ask your questions and just one more really fun time together. Jodi Frediani is going to be talking about her wonderful, wonderful book, The Magic of Monterey, and a whole bunch more. She is an internationally acclaimed marine wildlife photographer. She's been swimming with humpback whales for 24 years. And so she has some pretty neat experiences in that front as well. She's been photographing marine life in Monterey Bay for 15 years. And if you're friends with Jodi Frediani on Facebook, you're really lucky because you get to see gorgeous pictures all the time. She's also a humpback whale researcher. So you'll find her out on the whale watch boats, and you'll also find her on the research boats. So this is the first time we've had our last 2 talks have been remote, and we're really lucky that Jodi drove all this way to give us a talk. So I'd like to introduce you to Jodi. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Katerina, and all of you folks for showing up here tonight. And I want to thank Katerina and Trey and Wendy for the invitation, the hospitality, also Richard for the technical support, and I'm really delighted to be here. It's probably been 20 years since I've been up to Mendocino County. I've never been over to the coast. It's wonderful. The hospitality here is fantastic, and it's my pleasure to be here. So I will just say, this is, okay, we'll start. This is, I'm going to be talking about the species, part of the biodiversity in Monterey Bay. It's incredible. We've got a deep canyon that runs down the center. We have an amazing variety of species that are there. Can't cover all of them in 45 minutes. But because this is Whale Fest and it's about the gray whales, I'm going to start with them. These are the same gray whales we see in Monterey Bay area that are passing by you on their way north. And they also come down again on their way south. I will also say that besides sort of highlighting the species, I'm going to show a little bit about some of the challenges that they have to deal with along the way. So this photograph was taken, it's not a drone photo, it was taken from the cliffs of along the Big Sur coast. And while that's not Monterey Bay, it's part of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. And what we're looking at are two mothers with their calves of the year. They are heading from the lagoons down in Baja on their way back up, either to the Bering Sea, the Chukchi Sea, or maybe stopping along the way where some of the population feed. And they're swimming quite close to shore, and they do that for a number of reasons. One of those is they're calmer waters closer to shore. They're also shallower waters, and one of the challenges, the natural challenges they have to deal with as they pass along the coast is predation from killer whales. And they are not so successful in the shallow water. We've also got kelp here, so that causes interference for the killer whales. And because these whales are very close to shore, the shore break masks their blows and it probably masks any social sounds that they're communicating underwater. There's another gray whale heading back from the lagoons. This is taken from a whale watch boat. And you can see it's a little further offshore here and it's breaching. We don't see them breach as often in the Monterey Bay area as we do and as they do in Southern California or down in the lagoons. So it's always a treat when we get to see that. We also sometimes get to see them sort of spy hopping. They head out and there's an eye there. You look closely, that's looking at us. And I'm sure that I hope that those of you who are here this evening and those online actually got to hear Elisa Schulman-Janiger speak last week. It was a wonderful presentation about the work that she does with the gray whales in Southern California. And you probably know that down in the lagoons of Baja, they hang out with people. And the whales initiated the program there, approaching the boats. People can reach out and pet them. They sometimes pet their tongues. They lean over and kiss them. And it's the only population I know where it's allowed to actually interact that way with whales, and the gray whales initiated it. So I always kind of guess that once they come up to Monterey, that these whales probably had a chance to interact with boats on the breeding grounds, and now they're checking out the boats that are up on our way. These whales are generally bottom feeders, the gray whales, and they will feed on, amphipods, sort of up in the Arctic, that are dependent on algae that grows under the sea ice and then feeds, these amphipods which end up in the mud, and the gray whales filter them out and have mud streaming out through their baleen. They may feed on mysid shrimp off the coast of the Washington area. They are pretty opportunistic and they'll feed on what is available. And this is a gray whale skim feeding, surface feeding on krill in Monterey Bay. It doesn't happen often. 15 years I've been out on the water. This is the one time I saw it, and that was in 2010. And what I think was significant about that year, and some of what other things that we're seeing with the gray whales right now, is that they were perhaps hungry. And that was the same year that a gray whale from the North Pacific population was seen going, they didn't see it traveling there, but it was seen in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Israel. And that whale is presumed to have traveled, the Northern Passage was open, but because of ice melt, presumed to travel over there looking for food. So just to talk a little bit about some of this challenge for the gray whales, this is a graphic that I borrowed from a presentation that Dr. Stephen Swartz gave on gray whales. He's been studying them for decades down in the lagoons in Baja. And it's showing that basically for the last 800,000 years, starting over on the left, the carbon dioxide levels, which go all the way, and that dotted line, the white dotted line was the level in 1950. And then if you look above that, that's the current level. So we're seeing some pretty significant changes over the last 800,000 years. This next graphic was shared with me by an Israeli marine biologist who I met out on the Silver Bank in the Dominican Republic, where I was swimming with the whales like a month ago. And what we're looking in this case is And he's the fellow, he was talking to us. He studies dolphins and sharks, but he was also talking about that gray whale that he saw in 2010. The very, very white ice there is older ice. It's like at least 4 years or older. The gray is very young ice. And I'm going to try and play this again. And I apologize that I can't slow it down. But can you see my cursor? So the Bering and the Chukchi Seas are over in this area. Roughly, this is Alaska, this is Russia over here. And the ice, you can see, and this is like from 2007, it retracts, it expands, that's sort of seasonal. A lot of it's new ice. And then in September of 2016, there was very little ice up in the polar regions. And that's an important year because what they've been seeing with the grays, and I'm going to try and kind of do this quickly. I know Elisa talked about it at length, is what's called a UME, or an unexplained mortality event. And the first one, and if I make errors here, Elisa's listening, she'll be able to correct it afterwards. I'm not real good at dates at all, but in like 1907, 1998. And what that means is that they were seeing a lot of thin whales, a lot of stranded whales, basically whales that have died and ended up on shore, and not very many calves. And then the population seemed to recover. And in 2016, there was actually reasonably strong. I think it was around 26,000 whales. And then more recently, in 2025, there were only 13,000 grays estimated. And the calf population went from like 1465 to 85 calves. So it's a challenge. And I've included this photo here about the blob. I don't know what it was like up in this area, but in 2014 to 2016, you look at the image on the left, the red is the much warmer water, and say Monterey Bay is somewhere down where my cursor is in this area here. We've also got a lot of warm water. Is that there's what the scientists are now calling habitat compression, where the water was too warm, anchovies by the millions came into Monterey Bay, and we then had hundreds of humpback whales. We had thousands of seabirds. I mean, it was an incredible feeding fest, the thousands of sea lions. And that went on till about 2016. 2016 seemed to be a good year for the gray whales. I know that while this blob was there, it was not so good for the Alaskan humpback whales, which is a different population. At any rate, the photo on not the photo, but the graphic on the right is September 2025. So we're starting to see another hot water period off the coast of California, and it will be a matter of time to see how that pans out. In the meantime, one of the other challenges that not only grays, but many of the other whales find themselves running into is ship strike. And this was a rather sad case. I was out in a whale watch boat, and we saw this mother and calf heading north, and it was clear that the calf was very distressed. And you can see it's been sliced pretty seriously. The next day, I got a report that there was a carcass on shore. I went, checked it out, and I was able to match the coloration markings on this live animal with the one that had died. And at the time that these whales were heading north, the squid fishery, which comes to Monterey on a regular basis, was fishing right off of Point Pinos, which is the southern tip of the Monterey Bay. And that's right where, remember, we saw those mothers and calves hugging the shoreline. So that's right where they came through. And I'm certain that the boat captains don't want this to happen. I doubt that they were even aware of it, but it's a challenge that hopefully we can start to solve some of these problems. And a more natural challenge for the gray whales is, which I mentioned early, is killer whale predation. And I've got some pretty challenging photos. I've seen this happen a lot. I've kept those out of here because I don't know for the sensibilities, but this is just a little bit of to show what takes place. And you've got killer whales in there, attempting to actually drown the calf. That's the tail probably of the mother gray whale. Now you've got the orcas, and it's very difficult. That's the calf. It's hard to see what's going on here in just a moment. It's slowed down a little bit. There's a family of killer whales there, and they are trying to feed their family. So it's one of those difficult, there's the mother gray whale. It's one of those difficult parts of the natural world where you've got one mother attempting to save her calf. That's the calf's head on the left, and another group of mothers attempting to feed theirs. So this is an image that was taken probably a different predation event. And I think at this point, the whales were feeding, they were successful, they were feeding on the calf. And this large male killer whale came over to the Zodiac with a film crew in it. And you'll see that 3 of the 4 cameramen are completely oblivious to that whale right next to them. The fellow on the right in the yellow jacket and in the back there was a local. And so his name is Jason Bering. He knew exactly what was going on, and he had his camera on that whale. So I know that one of the other things people express concern about is that sometimes when these killer whales are successful, all they feed on is the tongue and maybe the lower jowls. And they go, well, but that's so wasteful. Well, first of all, nothing really gets wasted in the ocean, because if the killer whales aren't feeding on it, the sharks might be feeding on it. There are, sometimes the carcass ends up on shore. Oftentimes it still gets washed back out into the sea. This was taken in an area that's now been dubbed Shark Park. It's sort of in the Aptos area, for anybody who knows. There's a cement ship just north, and this was a little bit further south. I'd gotten a report that a carcass had come to shore and went the next day. It was no longer where it was. I looked around, I saw birds, and it had come farther south along the shoreline. And what we're looking at is a carcass that's been at sea for a little while, and a juvenile white shark attempting to feed on it. And here is a video of that. These juveniles, their jaws are not fully developed, so they generally feed on fish. But, when you have a bonanza, food bonanza like that show up, you try and take advantage of it. And the tissue, even the blubber on whales is incredibly fibrous and very difficult for birds to get through. It's difficult for juvenile sharks to get through. And you watch it, it's sort of struggling there. There's a bird patiently waiting up on the pec fin. And it's not much longer, but you can see what a struggle it is for this shark to try and get a bite. But we're going to wait to the end because this amazing little thing happens. And I felt incredibly fortunate to get out there, get my drone up, and lo and behold, there's a shark coming to feed on the carcass. You can see it circling around under the water. You can see where it's managed to get a bit off the tip of that fluke. And it's going to come back in, try again. And, it's a real challenge. And we tend to think of these sharks as, I know there was just a shark attack up here. Adults are a different story.
Yeah.
And as it swims over, and I've watched this many times, I can't do this with a microphone, okay, but a shark tail is like this. A whale tail is in the horizontal, a shark tail is in the vertical. And I believe what happened is, as that shark crossed over the tail stalk of that whale, the lower part of its fin went, uh-oh, something's after me, and it just went out of its way. All right, so a little bit about killer whales. We call them killers of whales. They were originally, they're orcas, Orcinus orcas, but these are transient killer whales, and they were named that by fishermen as killers of whales. And we just saw a little bit of that. They are people, come from far and wide to be able to see them in Monterey Bay. And this time of year is probably the best for that, April and May, although we're still in March. because they are coming up looking for some of the gray whale calves. And they're transients because they will be found up and down the west coast of the United States. And they travel in female-led family groups. They are quite a thrill to see. In fact, they started coming back to Monterey this week. I think they've seen them 4 times this past week. And 3 of those days was a group called the CA-51s. And they are also dubbed the friendly pod because they come over to boats. And this is Comet, who is one of the family members doing a spectacular breach. And this is another family member, Bumper, who approaches the boats and bumped them. And that's how he got his name. And in this case, he's showing what a character he is. That is actually a carcass that the family had successfully been feeding on. And he decided to momentarily wear it as a hat. You know, we've heard about salmon hats and other things that these whales do, but that was very temporary. This is a whale named CA-138, and this was sort of one of my first really successful photo shoots out there. And Nancy Black, who runs Monterey Bay Whale Watch, had been out in the morning. She took her passengers back, called me and said, if you can get down here, which is 50 miles from where I live, I'm going back out to see if I can find them because they were hunting, dolphins. And we get back out there, and here she is doing this massive tail throw, which apparently she was stunning this common dolphin. And if you look closely, right where the dorsal fin is, there's a set of tooth marks, and that's CA-138s. She had that dolphin in her mouth, but she chose not to kill it at that moment. She bunted it out of the water. It spun through the air, landed on the surface, and her 2 juveniles came over and they made the kill. And she came in to observe and maybe give them some pointers. So what we saw was a teaching situation. And it speaks to me of the intelligence of these animals, that it's not all about intuition. They have to learn how to do it. And here is mom breaking the process down into I won't say bite-sized chunks. Anyways, so that her kids can become successful and take care of themselves and then their own families in the future. Another one, I would just say that at some point, the images get easier to look at. So I hope this isn't too challenging for too many people. But when we see killer whales actually doing things with their prey, it's almost always a teaching situation, unless it's the gray whales, because they really have to work at that. Otherwise, the kill happens rapidly. Underwater, we might see an oil slick, we might smell the slick, and then we'll see action that we can tell they're feeding underwater. But in this case, it was a different family, and they were taking turns practicing stunning an elephant seal, a young elephant seal, throwing it in the air. So it's always quite challenging, but also quite amazing to me to see how the rest of the world feeds itself. They don't have knives and forks. They don't go to a supermarket and have their meat packaged, in saran wrap. They have to take care of it themselves. Moving on, anchovies. And these, I love seeing animals feed. That's just, it's like my focus. It's like behavior that is often difficult to see. These anchovies were feeding right next to the Santa Cruz Wharf. And this was, I think, last spring. And clearly there must have been a lot of plankton there. And what we're seeing are their gill rakers are open on the side of their heads there. The water passes through, the plankton end up and they, taken out by the gill rakers, and these fish are able to feed that way. It's the only time I've ever actually seen them feeding. And here we have a sea lion attempting to feed on the anchovies. And it's not as easy as one would expect. So what do anchovies do? To their strategy is to clump together in a bait ball. And what that means is that the animals on the inside are basically protected from predators such as fish or sea lions, who can only nab the ones on the outside. Or in a case like this, where the sea lion goes, aha, and swims right into the middle of the bait ball, now it's the ones in the perimeter, but it's still a challenge. So what do sea lions do? They will often feed on larger fish. And even that's a challenge for them, because they have to kind of throw the fish, through the air, try and tear off bites, or they've learned to feed alongside humpback whales. And I mentioned that the anchovy strategy for their protection is to gather in a bait ball. That is perfect for feeding by humpback whales, who are gulp feeders. They open their mouths, they have ventral pleats on the underside which expand and allow them to gulp vast amounts of water and fish. What happens is they don't get all the fish. Some of them get stunned. And this is a photograph taken by a humpback whale that had a suction tag on its back and was feeding. And I know the researchers put these tags on, which stay on, maybe 4 hours, maybe 24, maybe a little bit longer, to see what the whales were doing. And lo and behold, they get to see a sea lion zeroing in on a stray stunned anchovy. I don't have video of a researcher attempting to tag a humpback whale, but this is Ari Friedlander's lab. He provided me with the previous slide, and here he's out there trying to put one of these suction tags on a Risso's dolphin, much harder to do than the humpback whales. And he's using this long carbon fiber pole, reaching out, touches it, the suction cups attach, and it's very little intrusion on the animal. Who else feeds on anchovies? Humpback whales. And this was taken in 2015 when the blob was out there, and most of the whales were feeding out in the middle of the bay. And we'll see some of that in a moment. This particular whale found its own niche and came over to the Santa Cruz shore. There was a cove, not terribly large, would swim east every morning and then make a U-turn and then start swimming towards the western edge of the cove. I could actually see the water was shallow enough. It would take its pec fins and use them to herd the fish forward. And then when it got to the western edge of the bay, it would lunge up, and fish are flying and trying to escape all over the place. So my son reminded me that the sewer outfall line, which goes 3 miles offshore from that side, there was a cement wall that was built to hold that pipeline going out. And this whale was using that cement wall as a tool, bunching the fish up against it, and then leaping and feeding as it could. And 100 people sat on the cliffside there watching this day after day. During that same period, the pelicans were having a feast, and ordinarily pelicans plunge dive. So they're up here, they see a fish, and they look like they're falling into the sea. They've got special protective mechanisms to do that. This pelican was duck diving. There were so many anchovies by the shore, it would just sit on the water, plunge its head in, and come up with a mouthful of fish. And at the same time, we also had anchovies ending up in the Santa Cruz Yacht Harbor, which used to be a long, narrow lagoon with a sandbar in front of it that time of year. Once it was turned into a harbor, they have a dredge, and the dredge gets rid of the sandbar so the yachts can go in and out. That meant the anchovies could get inside. And even though they had oxygenators down the center channel, off on the sides, there was not enough oxygen and the anchovies died. So once they die, they start to decay. It ruins the boat paint. So all efforts were being made to get the fish out of the water, including big suction rigs, and everything's down to small nets. What other species do we have in the bay? We've got multiple species of dolphins, and things like rissos that you have here, Pacific white-sided dolphins, sometimes common dolphins. I didn't include them in this presentation, but I did the rare ones. These are northern right whale dolphins, and they are called that because they don't have, we're actually in this photo, there's 2 adults on the right and a juvenile on the left, long pointed beaks, and they're called northern right whale dolphins because they don't have a dorsal fin, neither do northern right whales. And the last photo and this photo, these dolphins were bow riding in incredibly calm conditions. And while we were busy dolphin watching, the dolphin was busy people watching. And that happens a fair amount of the time. You look down and they're rolling on their side and they know that we're up there. This is another angle of a northern right whale dolphin. You can see the beautiful coloration on the body, the short pec fins, that long pointed beak. And they're very fast. They can generally travel 15 knots, 15 miles an hour. They can put on speed of 22 miles an hour. The whale watch vessel is generally going about 9 knots, maybe 12 when it hears as a report of killer whales. So these guys are fast. And if they porpoise out of the water, they're back in before you can, keep their heads out. So it's a real treat to see that. We also have blue whales. And I understand that from time to time you see blue whales up here. This was, again, a very unique and special encounter. The captain thought it was foggy, he thought maybe these are killer whales. We went south of Point Pinos, and lo and behold, we saw what's a competitive group of blue whales. So that big head on the right is a we call primary escort, who is attempting to sort of gain brownie points with a female, who has that broken little flute in the background there. And then in front of her is a challenging male, this is where my cursor is there. And that's the only time I've ever seen this. It's the only time I've heard of anybody else seeing this in Monterey Bay. We will often see this kind of behavior with humpbacks on the breeding grounds. So it was an incredible treat to see blue whales doing that. Never seen a blue whale head out of the water like that. Here's another angle of the blue whale head. These are the largest animals to ever live on planet Earth, much larger than the dinosaurs. They can be 80, 90 feet long. You're looking at the top of the head. I want to call those jowls, but it's the top part of the jaw, not the underside. And here's the tail and the tail stalk, and you can see how incredibly powerful that is. So these whales can travel long distances in a day. They don't have the pectoral fins, that long ones that humpbacks have. They don't have the maneuverability and flexibility. You don't see them breach. You don't see them tail lob. You're lucky if you see them dive in with their flukes up, but they're quite a treat to actually be able to see. This was, this was a blue whale that turned out to have been hit by a ship north of Santa Cruz, sort of midway between Santa Cruz and San Francisco. That's me up on the rocks. I heard about this, saw a report on Facebook, went out there. It's Bean Hollow State Beach, about 25 miles north of Santa Cruz. The photographer for the local paper was out there at the same time, and unbeknownst to me, he used me as provide a sense of scale for this whale. Upside down there, as my photograph, you can see what the ventral pleats on a blue whale look like. And when this is turned out to be a pregnant female, and when she came into the cove, there are rocks, apparently it applied enough pressure and her fetus was expelled on the shore. And, so it was a bit of a tragedy. And later on, I'll show a little bit of one of the methods that is being developed to try and prevent ship strike, but it is a challenge for whales to have to try and overcome. And it's very difficult because once it's killed, it can't transmit that information to the rest of the population. So humpback whales, you have them passing along here as well. Anybody seen humpback whales from here? Yeah, handful. Okay. And they're crowd pleasers. Not that they're doing it to please us, but they are very surface active. They've got these 15-foot long pectoral fins. They can use them to herd fish. They can spin. They can raise themselves up. They can, do all sorts of things with them. Use them to what we call peck slap the water with them. And most of that is communication. Sometimes it's removing parasites. Sometimes it's an attempt to get disentangled from fishing gear. They'll also do tail throws like this whale is doing. They do tail lobs. I think some of it is that we see calves doing that a lot on the breeding ground, is that they're getting fit because they've got to go on these long migrations and get their bodies in shape. So it's a treat to see the humpbacks. And then, of course, there's feeding. I said they're gulp feeders. A lot of that feeding happens under the water. So we see them coming up for air and then they dive back down. And it depends where the fish are in the water column. When they're at the surface, the whales will lunge up through the surface, and you can see the ventral pleats on the underside of the jaw here starting to, they've expanded, now they're starting to contract. Of course, there's extra anchovies that, escaped, and the water gets filtered out of the baleen on the side of the mouths. If you go to the Discovery Center here, the Noyos Discovery Center, you can actually see what the baleen looks like. It's made out of the same material as our fingernails, but it's like having a sieve in the mouth which keeps which I didn't, I'm going to go back to that. If you look closely here, you can see the anchovies caught on the inside of the baleen. And when the whale swallows the water, they drain the water out, and then the anchovies go down the throat, which is about as wide as a grapefruit. During the blob, we had large quantities of anchovies, so we had large quantities of whales feeding together. If you've got smaller bait balls, you might get 1 or 2 whales. The more fish, the more prey, the more whales you have feeding on them. Before the anchovies came in, which is around 2014, whales were feeding on krill. And the amount of effort that a whale takes into going after its food depends on the escape behavior of the prey. So anchovies are, maybe 6 inches long. The way they can fly, you saw those pictures, fly pretty high. The whales have to fly up there as well. In the case of krill, which our krill are about 1/2 inch, and you can see they're barely getting above the surface of the water, the whale doesn't have to move quite as fast. And what you're looking at there is the tip of the top jaw, or the tip of the rostrums, and the lower jaw over here, and that's some krill doing their best to escape and live for another day. Back at that time, krill were everywhere. I think now the anchovies are probably feeding on the krill, and the other species would rather feed on the fish because they're richer and higher in nutrition. I took this photograph leaning over the side of the boat, and they were right at the surface. So back to challenges. Entanglement in fishing gear is a huge problem for whales. And I think on the East Coast, the North Atlantic population, it's something like 66% of the humpbacks have entanglement scarring, and many of them have been entangled more than once. So it's a real challenge, and we don't know how many whales don't make it and don't wash ashore. This particular whale managed to actually disentangle itself. So that happens many times, and other times it requires somebody to go in there and disentangle them. And there's been a recent action taken by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife just last week, is that for the last several years, they have prohibited the Dungeness crab fishery from fishing in the Monterey area and further north and south while the whales are there. And now they have changed that, and they are allowing the fishing, but they're requiring the crab fishers to use the new type of traps, which we call pop-up traps, where instead of having a 300-pound trap on the bottom and a line coming to the surface with floats that the whales can get entangled in, all of that's kept together on the bottom. And when the fishers are ready to retrieve the traps, they can locate them remotely. They can trigger a release of the flotation and the line, and then they take the traps out of the water. So this is basically a win-win, although I understand that it's a big requirement on the part of the fishing community to purchase new traps. And I hope that they get support to do that, because they don't want to lose the traps. They don't want to lose business, but the whales don't have a choice. So we're hoping that works out. And then we're getting close to the end here, but this is a whale who I know Katerina is familiar with. Her name is Fran, and she was the most well-photographed humpback whale in the California population. There's a citizen science website that uses AI to identify humpback whales by their flukes. And here we have Fran, who unfortunately had gone north of Santa Cruz in 2022 with her calf of the year, got hit by a ship, washed ashore in Half Moon Bay, partway up to San Francisco. And there was huge concern that her calf had been lost as well. And her calf is named Aria, and fortunately, Aria was not hit. Aria is alive and well and has been seen and had learned enough from her mother that she's been able to feed herself on her own. So I'd like to be able to show solutions to some of these problems, so we're not just left really, really devastated. But when I was out on the Silver Bank this season, we had this Israeli researcher on board, and we had this unit. I took a photograph of our boat called the Sea Pod, and it was developed by an Israeli company. 1,500 of them are in application on ships worldwide right now, to being used to help identify other ships in the area. So it's an artificial intelligence-based maritime navigation assistant, acts as a fully automated watchkeeper that doesn't sleep or miss. So it can help alert captains that there are ships in the area even at night, and when they can't see as well. This was on our ship to try and train it to take photographs of whales and then use AI to help it identify which things are whales. So hopefully that will be successful. I have this slide in here, again, a whale that Katerina is quite familiar with from down in Mexico, a whale named Batman. And this is out of Ari Friedlander's lab in Monterey. And one of his younger researchers, Logan Palin, has been studying the toxins and took blubber sample from an adult male. Batman is probably about 40 years old now. Blood samples from a sea lion with a pup, and then a sea otter. And they were able to identify something like 144 different toxic substances. Batman tested positive for 106 of those. And many of them, things like DDT, were from the 1970s, PCBs. So these are long, like what they call forever chemicals. And it's something that we have an obligation to try and take care of. A lot of it comes from runoff from agricultural fields. A palate cleanser. This is a friendly humpback whale. And, I said, we love to watch them. They apparently enjoy watching us sometimes as well. And I see this happening all over the world. People are always excitedly posting photos on Facebook. The whale comes over. It's doing a spy hop. So now both of its eyes can see the boat. And I've seen them sometimes go alongside, lie on their sides as they go alongside the boat with one eye up, looking at person to person. So they know that there is a sentient being up there. And it's a very exciting opportunity. All right, I'm going to move on here. Who else do we have in the bay? We have Mola Mola ocean sunfish. Anybody seen them? Yeah, good. Okay, love them. They hang out on the surface, getting warm, and gulls come and pick parasites off them. They feed on gelatinous creatures, have these great big eyes. And here it's feeding on a Velella velella, otherwise known as by-the-wind sailors. I understand that you've had some up in this area on shore lately. They're my second favorite animals out there. They're just like little magical sea jewels, I call them. Sea otters, southern sea otters. They were almost extirpated by the Russian fur traders, who caught as many as they could and sold the furs largely to the Chinese aristocracy. There was a small population that was inaccessible down along the Big Sur coast, and that population has repopulated Monterey Bay. They are, again, opportunistic feeders. This one is having itself some abalone. They're good at prying them off the rocks. And in fact, there's a story there, which I know I'm going to run out of time here, but when the sea otters were taken, when the sea otters were there before the Russians hunted them out, the abalone would hide in the crevices to avoid the sea otters. Once the sea otters are gone, the abalones would move out onto the rocks, and then the humans figured out how to get them off of the rocks. So it's everything we do has some kind of an impact. whoops, let's go back here. So we've got a mother and a pup feeding on clam. We've got an otter there on the top right with a really nice crab. And we've got a sea otter feeding on sea urchins. And I'm sure the Noyo Center folks here can tell you a lot about sea urchins. In fact, they're doing amazing research here to try and turn them into commercially viable food, because we don't have enough otters anymore, and the sea urchins kill off the kelp. They feed on kelp, kill the kelp beds, which are nurseries. So we need to find ways to get people to want to harvest the sea urchins. And then the one on the right is feeding on something called a fat innkeeper worm that live in the mud and share their little burrows with other critters. We have harbor seals. Saw a couple out here in your harbor earlier this afternoon. We have northern elephant seals, and I know they've got an amazing skeleton over in the Discovery Center in town of a big bull elephant seal. I was there in January at Ano Nuevo, which is just up the coast, had the great opportunity to see this female give birth right smack in front of us. Smack for the pup is what it was actually. And there's mom, bellowing at it, giving a greeting, and that's how they recognize themselves on the beach full of all these seals, is by their voices. And then the pup has had its first opportunity to experience life with a face full of sand. So, and we've got a big bull. He's, very well could be the beach master of this area. He's got a harem. He's telling the other bulls to keep away. And the bulls who will fight with one another learn to recognize the voices of the bulls they don't want to tangle with. And these guys are now dealing with their own threat, which is that avian flu has started to make its way through the population in Ano Nuevo. And apparently they found 100 dead seals so far. So hopefully it won't go too far, but it's a new problem. And we have leatherback turtles. They nest in Indonesia, and then they swim across the ocean and they come out to Monterey Bay to feed. We don't see a lot of them, but we do see some. This one is feeding on an egg yolk jelly. We also have sea nettle jellies. We have other kinds of jellies. We've got, they call them moon jellies, and sometimes large groups of these jellies. And we have less common, the purple striped jelly on the right, the pelagic red crabs that came up during the last blob, and they were all over the place. These were taken in the harbor, and they tend to move backwards. They're really amazing little critters. We'll see if they come back up again now that the waters are warming up. And the bottom animal there is a red octopus taking refuge, trying to camouflage itself with the bryozoans on a kelp frond. And this was a case where I'd only ever seen one before that had been caught by an otter. And all these anchovies got into the Monterey harbor, and they used up all the oxygen and suddenly died like that. And now there was very little oxygen, and the poor octopus had to come to the surface. So I think some of these, these situations have to do with changes in the sea conditions. It has to do with the climate. You end up with the anchovies coming closer to shore, and then we run into these issues. And sort of last but not least here, Laysan albatross. And I could, with another half hour, I could go over black-footed albatross, which we see a lot of, particularly scavenging with the killer whales. We've got shearwaters, which come up from New Zealand. Gulls, pelicans, we saw a little bit. We have terns, we have fulmars, we have cormorants, we've got other birds out there. The Laysans are not that common, and they're very beautiful. And we have one, I'm going to just skip over that for right now. We have stories about a lot of these different species in the book that Katerina mentioned, Wild Monterey Bay, where my partner and I on this project interviewed 40 people about their most memorable wildlife encounters in the bay. And I illustrated them with mostly my photos where I had them. We also have photographs of the storytellers and asked them what their background was, what brought them to Monterey Bay in the first place. And with that, are there any questions?
Jodi, that was fantastic. We have so many questions. Who has questions?
Can I ask a question about why whales breach?
Why do whales breach?
Need microphone. Because they can. We think that a lot of it is communication. You know, I mean, if you've been out there and never seen a whale breach, you know, from close by, makes a huge amount of noise. And that noise travels well through the water. We see them do more of that when in windy conditions. So it may be a way of communicating long distance to let each other know. The real answer is there's a whole lot we don't know or understand about their behavior. But they also will sometimes do that to rid themselves of parasites. You know, they might have whale lice, the barnacles might be bugging them. There's a theory which I don't subscribe to, that they're doing it to help them poop, because a boat captain saw the whale breach and poop, but you know, I've seen them dive and poop. So I don't think they dive to poop, but you know, sometimes these things happen together. So, and they will often do it if they're entangled in an attempt to get rid of the gear. And there may be other reasons.
Okay, we've got a question from Caroline Armand. Hi, Caroline. Is the anchovies depleting oxygen in the bay natural or human impacts?
Or that, wait, the
Is
anchovies.
the anchovies depleting oxygen in the bay natural or human impacts?
Okay, good question. They're not depleting it in the bay, they're depleting it in the harbors. And these harbors are man-made, you know, human-made. They're not natural features. As I said, the Santa Cruz Harbor was a lagoon that had a sandbar, and the anchovies would not have been able to get in there. The Monterey Harbor has a big jetty that was built to create it and turn it into a harbor. So we've created these enclosed sea areas that weren't designed to have all those anchovies in there. But I think that why we're seeing that is in part because of what's called this habitat compression, where you end up with inhospitable temperatures offshore and the anchovies come in, and maybe that's where the food is at that moment in time, and they end up in the harbors.
Who's got a question out here in the audience? Yes.
There's also one that's-
Just the sonar from the Navy, I remember years ago hearing about its invasive intensity, and used to track subs and, you know, other naval vessels and so on. Is that still an issue, whales?
Is the naval sonar still an issue with whales?
That's a question that I don't have an answer to. I don't think it's as much of a problem as it was in the past, but as I haven't heard anybody talking about it. And my feeling is if it was still a serious issue, it would probably show up on my radar. But if anybody else online hasn't, or even here has an answer that's better than that one, I don't know. I know that the biggest issues that we're dealing with right now are ship strikes, entanglement, and perhaps plastic pollution, which is connected to the toxicity issue as well.
Any other questions out here in the audience? Yes.
What's the best way to prevent boat strikes? Would you recommend passing legislation, or is it just the negligence of boat captains that aren't watching what's in the water directly in front of them?
What's the best way to prevent boat strikes? Is it a question of changing regulations or working with the captains, or what is the best way to prevent ship strikes?
It's a good question. Speed is probably the biggest threat. And a lot of the problems happen with large ships that are traveling on a schedule because time is money. And they can't see these whales, and the whales can't hear because of the design, you know, the way the boats move through the water. They can't hear the ships coming in. Even if they could, I'm not sure they recognize them as a threat. And they have found that where ships drop their speed, that they can reduce the number of strikes. And so that has happened voluntarily in a lot of areas. Getting it as a regulation that it has to happen is a lot more challenging. And one of the problems, one of the other solutions is moving the shipping lanes so that they're not in the same place as the boats, as the whales. But that becomes difficult, say, San Francisco Bay, when they have to go into the bay. And another thing about that, which is a different angle. So I just heard like yesterday, there were something like 5 or 6 gray whales in San Francisco Bay. Gray whales in San Francisco Bay is pretty much a new, maybe it's an old phenomenon, but it's now a new phenomenon. And we believe they're going in there because they're looking for food. And there's a huge amount of ship traffic going through there. So they run the risk of getting hit.
So thank you so much, Jodi. That was a great presentation. And that's all.